All right, my name is Marissa Salazar. I am a PMM on the Office 365 Security and Compliance Marketing team, and my extreme apologies for the mistake in the time. So I'll get through this as quickly as possible, and we have a lot of online resources to talk about Office 365 compliance as well. So I do want to start off with a quick video just to kind of set some context around how our customers are using Office 365 security and compliance features in their everyday lives. And this does a great example of illustrating that.
Formula One is all about data. That's the lifeblood of the team. That's where the intellectual property sits. In order to be competitive in Formula One, not only must we develop the product, but we also need to protect it from our competitors. That's why we need to keep our data safe.
Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection provides safeguards in the background to protect our information and our users from targeted attacks. And Advanced Security Management provides real-time alerting of suspicious activity so that we can investigate and take any action.
We also have more control over who has access to our data than before, even Microsoft engineers, because we've enabled customer lockbox.
What's powerful is that this intelligence extends beyond security.
Our legal teams operate from two different sites, the UK and France. So if I ever need to do a global search of our company's documents, I can use advanced eDiscovery and have all of the information I need at my fingertips and delivered in a condensed and fast manner.
Ultimately, our competitiveness at the track is based on the teamwork. As a product, Office 365 E5 is going beyond providing us the trust. It also provides features and intelligence to make sure that we will have the capacity to succeed.
Okay. So when we talk about cloud concerns around security and compliance, we found that most of those cloud concerns do land around these three subject areas. So security, compliance, and transparency being those big three. We know, for example, that 73% of enterprises have indicated security as a top challenge in holding back SaaS adoption, and as Microsoft, of course, that is a very big deal to us. We also know that at 63% of organizations state challenges with transparency, and having those challenges restrict them from growing their cloud usage, which also, as Microsoft, we see as a very big problem. So Office 365 Trust has four main principles that are realized in two distinct dimensions. The first dimension being built-in capabilities, so what we have built into the service and what we have enabled by default. And then the second dimension being customer controls, so what our customers have the flexibility to implement in their own environment. So I'll start at the bottom with transparency, and this, of course, is very important to us. Moving to the cloud should not mean losing the ability to know what's going on in your environment. And in this case, we hope that it actually gives you more visibility into what's going on in your environment. We maintain multiple copies of your data across data centers for redundancy. We always share with you where that data is located, in what regions and in what countries, and if we are expanding into different or new countries in a region that you're located in, for example, we're committed to giving you at least 1 month, if not more, notice that we're going to be doing that. So we're quite transparent there. We also are very transparent about who has access to your data and under what circumstances. And as we're talking about compliance today, that's going to come up a little bit later as well. For the most part, nobody has access to your data under any circumstances, but there is a scenario in terms of break fix where somebody might, for example, need to access your data in order to remediate an issue that you as a customer brought up. And with some of our products like Customer Lockbox, you're actually able to be a piece and a player in that process. We also have a 99.9% uptime guarantee, and that is financially backed. And we also publish recent worldwide uptimes on the Office 365 Trust Center, and we do that quarterly. As far as privacy goes, I guess I'll jump around a little bit. Microsoft is unique amongst cloud providers in that we have over 10 years of privacy experience, and we have cloud-specific privacy principles that we operate by. So we're contractually committed to not mine your data for advertising purposes, for example. In fact, like I mentioned before, we don't use your data for anything other than providing you with a world-class service. Again, we're very transparent about where your data is stored and also give you the flexibility to take all of that data with you if and when you ever decide to leave the service. It's very important for us as Microsoft that our customers know that we understand we are just the custodians of your data. You are the owners of your data. And that principle comes into play in many different aspects across these trust principles, privacy being one of them, compliance being another. Government requests for information is a question that we get a lot. We do not own your data, and we are purely the custodians of it. For the large majority of all circumstances, you are the only one who is ever able to access that and do anything with it. We also have a lot of customer controls to enable privacy and a lot of these other features. Things like rights management services that allow users to encrypt information based on different policies or different settings, and giving individuals or groups explicit permissions to how they can copy, share, read, write, have access to that information. And whenever we build features, we always make sure to consider whether those privacy features or those features should be enabled at an end user level or an administrator level. So it's something that we consider within every feature that we build, not just security features. So security, physical security, 24-hour monitoring of data centers, seismic bracing at all of our data centers, multi-factor authentication for physical access to data centers, other types of data security, encryption, logical isolation at rest for customer data, really strong authentication and operational practices that we employ across our data centers and how we operate our business. And then, of course, giving people those unique customer controls, things like rights management and group policy settings to allow you to tune up or tune down your security settings based on the needs of your organization. And then compliance, which is really what we're here to talk about today. We're always committed to being compliant with laws wherever we are, so laws and governments in all locations where we reside. And in those cases where a precedent is not set, as this is a rapidly evolving landscape, we are also committed to working with those industries to set those boundaries where they need to be. And we've already shown that in a lot of our past action over the past couple of years. So we're here today to talk about compliance. And when we talk about compliance, the first thing that really grounds us in this conversation is talking about data. And we see data growing at a continually very, very fast rate. In fact, it doubles every 2 years. And it's predicted by the year 2020 that there are going to be 44 zettabytes of information in the cloud. And that is a lot of data. So with this very high growth rate, it's getting harder and harder for organizations to handle, and to know what to do with this data and how to operationalize that. So not only is this data growing very quickly, but it's also being attacked more than ever before. And we talked yesterday a lot about our security features and how we're handling that. But with expanding amounts of data and rapidly morphing attacks, many of these attackers are simply doing things like throwing mud at the wall and seeing what sticks. And in fact, there's 230,000 new malware samples that are created each day that we need to constantly be protecting ourselves against. And that adds up to $100 billion of annual cost of cybercrime. So this is really, really expensive. There's also an extreme risk when it comes to individuals. 59% of employees admit to stealing proprietary information when they quit, or they're fired, or they leave a company for any reason. And whether they mean to take this information or not, it doesn't matter. It's still a huge risk to your organization. So both compliance and security are both very important to your organization from both a compliance and regulatory standpoint, and then also financial. It's not surprising that when surveyed, 2 of the top 3 cloud concerns are security and compliance. However, the top cloud concern is the lack of visibility and transparency that you have into your data when you become a cloud customer. And you're struggling to understand what's happening with your data, and you may have policies in place and are unsure about how that translates to a cloud scenario. So jumping in, traditionally, we at Microsoft have given you a set of very powerful tools and to set the right policies and to regulate information in whatever way makes sense for your organization. The problem with that is, however, that we haven't given you necessarily the right transparency into what your data looks like to be able to know if you're making the right decisions, and then if those tools are actually doing what you wanted them to do, to know that you have the right policies in place. So it's a little bit of a circular problem. Some of you do use third-party tools to gain this transparency into your organization, which is great. The challenge there, however, is that there's a rift and a divide between those 2 tools when you use third-party tools and you're looking into Office 365, for example, and those investigatory tools. And it's not as effective as they could be if they were working together. So that's really the point of a lot of our compliance solutions, is that we're committed to improving and giving you access to these tools and to the insights that we already have just by running that data, so that we can not only make the service better, but also make sure that you know that you're making the right decisions. Some of you may have heard of the security intelligence graph, and this is really how we're imagining this with the security intelligence graph. So what is that? It essentially allows us to use a few different dimensions that we can learn about your organization, so we can create this snapshot or picture about what your organization looks like and what you look like as an individual, and then how it's all performing. So once we have all of that information, we have this very clear picture, we can suggest the right policies and also suggest that you take the right actions at the right time. And all of those factors are extremely important. So one of those things that we look at is industry. And when it comes to compliance and regulations, this is going to be extremely important. We're all in different industries that we have to comply with, and we want to make sure that you do. Another one of those is size. A small or a medium-sized company is going to have different concerns and different needs than an extremely large organization, and we want to consider those as well. Of course, geography, depending on what country or what region of the world you're in, and then even within the United States, what state or what combination of state and industry you're in makes a very big difference. The ecosystem really refers to that richness of information that we have as Microsoft and all of those inputs that we're constantly getting from over 1 billion inputs a day from our various services and users around the world. Your role, and this could be multiple people within an organization, but if you're responsible for compliance or security in your organization, that is not necessarily always the same person, and the same people don't always care about the same things in the administrator or IT world. And then actions. So this is things that you've already done, and it gives us a better picture into what you're trying to do. And it's that search engine idea where you've done something and now we can suggest further things for you to do based on what we think that you're doing or what it looks like you are doing. So if I were to reimagine this with an organization or an IT administrator or a compliance officer named Rob, let's start learning a little bit about Rob. He works in the healthcare organization, or in the healthcare industry, and of course there are tons of rules and regulations that the healthcare industry demands. He works in a very, very large organization, which is going to give us further insights into what he might be doing as a company. Maybe he needs a lot more flexibility in the controls that we're giving him from a security and compliance standpoint, much more so than small or medium-sized company that more tend to use our out-of-the-box solutions. They're located in Washington State, USA, and especially because they're in healthcare, there are healthcare-specific things that are taking place in Washington specifically, and we know, the intersection of those things and what he might need to know about. This refers to that ecosystem that I was talking about. Based on all of these inputs, we can easily identify other organizations that are like you in Office 365. And it's very interesting because it's very difficult, especially with cloud services, to know, it's difficult or impossible to know what other people are doing who are like you, what actions they're taking to protect themselves and to stay compliant. He is a compliance administrator, so we know exactly what his day-to-day is like. And then he has enabled extra mailbox storage for his users. So these actions, for example, we see the deep linkage between the usage of some features and the usage of other features. And maybe, for example, we see that many people who enable extra mailbox storage, they typically set up certain retention policies that go along with them. So we can help Rob do that and really understand what he's trying to do. So what is Office 365's commitment to meeting and staying up to date with the ever-evolving industry standards across geographies? This is a big question and a very important one. We have a global hyperscale enterprise-grade infrastructure with enterprise reliability, no standing access to data that is secure by design and maintains leadership in meeting compliance certifications. And we'll talk a little bit more about those certifications on the next slide. For more detail on where our data centers are located, you can visit the Office 365 Trust Center, and we have data maps on those locations. And then if and when, or if you are an Office 365 customer, we can tell you a lot more detail about where your data is located, especially important when it comes to multinational companies or people who are running multiple services. I think they're going to all pop up. So Office 365 is a global service, and continual compliance refers to our commitment to evolve those controls to stay up with industry standards and regulations that apply to your industry and geography all around the world. So this is a snapshot of a lot of those, some of which apply differently in different geographies, and we're very aware of that, like I said, especially when it comes to organizations who are located all around the world. The great thing is, because of our regulations often share the same or similar controls, it makes it easier for us to meet the requirements of new regulations. And we've also built a specialist compliance team that continuously tracks those standards and regulations and develops common control sets for the product team to build into the service. So things like EU model clauses, ISO 27001, HIPAA, FISMA, et cetera. A common question that I get is, oh, so you're saying that Microsoft is HIPAA compliant? No, Microsoft is not HIPAA compliant because we are not a healthcare company, but we help you remain HIPAA compliant. We know what it means for you to have healthcare information, and we help you do that, and we can stay on top of that and make sure that you're doing all of those right things when it comes to privacy and control and security settings, as well as things like data governance and what you're doing with your data. So the next question, what solutions does Microsoft provide to bring data overload under control and support my ability to achieve organizational compliance? So like we were talking about before, data is exploding and it's more and more complex than ever. And the growth is being really triggered by a variety of sources and types. I don't know if that fact is up there, but every 18 months, a corporation doubles its amount of data. And that's a lot to handle and a lot to regulate. So a challenge, especially with this, is organizations don't even know what data they have. So how can they go about managing that liability and risk that sits with them by holding all of this data? There's email documents and social media and instant messaging and all types of inputs from all types of sources. So the question really ends up being, how do I manage all of this data? And how do I make intelligent decisions? Because a lot of times that decisions just ends up being, we'll just keep it all. And in many cases, that's putting you at more security risk than if you were even just to delete it all. So how do you bring order to all of this chaos? As your data increases, the demands upon your organization also increase in order to govern that. So you're required by your business and local requirements to keep and protect what's important. You also need to make sure that users can quickly access appropriate information, and then that's really paramount to staying competitive as an organization. And then you also want to make sure that you're constantly protecting the masses from new threats, and it's very visible. The impact of leaks and breaches on organizations is very strong and felt very heavily. So really what the point of this slide is it's all about data governance. It's all about eDiscovery. It's all about being able to quickly find what you need. And then also auditing. And this shows up in a lot of our different security and compliance areas, being able to monitor and investigate actions that are being taken on your data and make sure that you can control that what you're doing is the right thing. So our compliance vision being productivity first, we need to allow end users to make informed choices. User education shows up through things like DLP policy tips without hampering the productivity of these users. A lot of times data leaks, as probably we know, are not always malicious on the behalf of end users. They're not trying to tear an organization down. It's often the result of end users sharing information with people inside or outside of their organization simply in an effort to get their job done. They want to be productive, and they're going to do that however they find most convenient, whether that's using outside applications, whether that's sharing information and not classifying it properly. A lot of these things are not malicious, but they happen. And then suite-wide also is extremely important here. Being able to apply consistent compliance controls and reports across all of Office 365. As we know, Office 365 is very vast in the services that it offers. And I know probably many of you, and I've met many customers in different situations who have applied one policy in one place of their service and didn't realize that it didn't extend to those other services that their end users were using. So just because something is protected in one place doesn't mean it's protected across your entire environment. So everything that we build within Office 365, especially when it comes to compliance solutions, our goal is to make that suite-wide and give you that control so you do something in one place and it reflects across your whole organization. So we're investing across Office 365 in a couple of different primary areas. We have our Security and Compliance Center, which is really your hub for controlling security and compliance at your organization. Depending on what SKU or what licensing model you have, some different options will come up in this view of the Security and Compliance Center. There's also a place to surface recommendations and insights based on those signals that we're receiving from your tenant. So for example, and those show up really on the side of the screen that is, I guess over here, these recommendations for you. You see some things showing up there like, hey, we notice you have this type of financial information and you have tax records. Maybe you should retain your tax records. We know the policies that occur around those, especially in your geography. Or 80% of your organization is not part of a retention policy. That's kind of a red flag to us. You don't have to do that, but we can say, hey, organizations like you typically do this. This is why. Do you want us to help you do that? Or we notice you don't have any DLP policies in place. And recommendations like these based on your own activities make it easier for you to implement the right policies and make sure that you're doing the right thing. Service assurance, which I think you can see up here as well. The use of service assurance in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center is a place to access documents that describe a variety of different topics, including Microsoft security best practices for customer data stored in Office 365, as well as things like independent third-party audits of Office 365 and implementation and testing details for things like security and privacy. So all of this is available to you in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, and is essentially where you're going to be taking most, if not all, of these actions from. And this just further reiterates your organization, configuration, your size, geography, industry, and role all send signals to that security and compliance center for you, and those different intelligent security graph recommendations and descriptions come up there for you based on who you are and what you're doing. Effectively governing data is extremely important. Hopefully all of us know that, but not everybody does. Most organizations tend to simply journal their data and then end up outsourcing it. And this leads to a lot of things. Most importantly, in a lot of folks' opinion, is it leads to extremely high costs. It also leads to very increased risks because you're outsourcing all of that data somewhere else, and even if it's a reliable organization, you're still entering an element of risk there. You're also seeing something that is just point in time because by its nature, you have to take a snapshot of all of that data and then outsource it to a third party. So we want to continually talk to folks about why governing your data is important. And this is a bit of an illustration on what it looks like to outsource that data to a third party. Increased time, of course, also is a challenge that customers are facing here too. If they can run these reports on their own, it would save a lot of time and therefore money. And also no service-wide insights. So bringing us back again to that concept of having things that look across the entirety of Office 365, that's very, very important. In this type of scenario where you're outsourcing Exchange data to a third party, you're only looking at what's happening in Exchange. And as we know, things that happen in Exchange are often very closely related to what's happening in SharePoint or what's happening in Skype for Business. These things don't live in silos on their own because that's not how we work. So in Office 365, in these types of data governance scenarios, data remains within Office 365. So Exchange stays within Exchange, et cetera. If you put a preservation policy in place, for example, people start deleting emails from Outlook because that's how they, live their work lives or whatever it might be. But Outlook and Exchange looks exactly the same to them. It wouldn't impact their productivity. However, because you have all of those retention policy in places, nothing really gets deleted. They can go on with their workday just as they would like to. People also have data that comes from everywhere, not just in Office 365. So yes, we can bring in data from various sources, and then you can perform all of these things on them, data governance, eDiscovery, et cetera. So talking again about those benefits of in-place Office 365 over journaling, we talked about the reduced risk, definitely lower costs, no impact to end users. And again, you're seeing those insights across the entirety of the service. So this is just a bit of an animation about exactly how that Office 365 compliance data lifecycle happens. And hopefully you can read a bit of it, but I'll illustrate this a little bit hopefully better for you. So you're ingesting data, for example, as you're migrating to Office 365 from outside of Office 365. So your on-premise environment, from file shares, from third-party archives, et cetera. This all comes into Office 365, and then you're able to use all of these appropriate services as it's appropriate for that data. Of course, as we know, we also have data coming in from all sorts of other sources. Social, locations, document collaborations, things like SMS and text messaging, places like Salesforce, for example, we need all of that information as well. And you can, of course, bring that into Office 365 through partners and different types of approaches there. So then when it comes to actually applying these compliance activities to this data, we could talk about in-place eDiscovery, for example. So within Office 365, you're able to take all of that data that you've imported, preserve it as necessary, identify what's going to be important to you or what you're actually needing to work with here. search through that. And as you can see, these stacks of paper are getting smaller and smaller because really what the purpose of this practice here is to cull down all of that massive amounts of information that we're looking through so that we're only exporting and reviewing that small amount of data that is actually going to be relevant to whatever we're doing. And that really ends up being where most of the cost comes in when you're not doing this within Office 365, is that review list is often much, much larger than it would be if you were taking this approach. And then auditing as well, of course, giving you the ability to audit not only your own and your end user actions within Office 365, but also things that are happening within the service itself. And those show up through either a management activity API that you might be using or through the Compliance Center Office 365 activity report. So where are we at today with data governance? We have those ability to import, we have those retention policies in place, the ability to have records management, our compliance across all sorts of different regulations, as well as the Security and Compliance Center. Some things about where we're going and how this is quickly developing in a lot of updates that you're going to be seeing during this quarter of 2017. Things like retention based on classifications. So you can do this today using our data loss prevention features within Office 365 Security, but we want to expand that feature to data governance as well. So being able to use document fingerprints or content analysis to make decisions about retention and classification. So you're really automating a lot of that process, and it's taking the burden off of you. Intelligent import and retention, and I think we'll see this in a demo in a moment, but that really is referring to, hey, you're importing all of this data into Office 365. We recognize, for example, that you're importing 15 years worth of data, but we recognize that a large percentage of your data is of this type, and you're not required to keep that data after 5 or 7 years, whatever it might be, and you're actually putting yourself at more risk by importing that data than you are by not importing it. And an interesting story there, very, very relevant to that scenario. We work in our team at Microsoft with many vendors who do a lot of different things with us. I work with a video production vendor. One of the vendors at that organization recently maybe 15 or 20 years ago, he worked for an unnamed company as a hired camera person. So he wasn't even a full-time employee there. Years later, recently, this company got hacked, and they still had all of his personally identifiable information in their system somewhere. He worked for them as a contractor years and years ago, just as a hired camera person, and because their organization got hacked, his personal data was put at risk. And they reached out to him, 15 or whatever years later, and now have offered him lifetime credit monitoring and are going to be responsible for paying for him for the rest of his life. So the moral of that story really is better data governance policies in place. They wouldn't have had to do that. Not only would his data not have been at risk 15 years later after he stopped working for this organization, but they would not have the financial burden of having to pay for his credit monitoring for the rest of his life. So this is not just to keep, culling data down and making sure that you have less to work with, but it really is putting you at less risk as an organization. So let's walk through a little bit about what that data governance looks like and how easy it is to create those policies. So we have a screenshot here looking at the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. If I go into the data governance dashboard, and you can see the navigation on the left-hand side, you've seen the main screen change into, hey, there's a lot of statistics that we can report back to you in this view about what's going on with your data and how you're governing it. On the right-hand side, in the recommended for you kind of pane, we notice you have data that's ready to be imported. So let's go ahead and start importing your data. This really is referring to those intelligent insights that I was talking about. Do you want us to go ahead and filter your data? 44% of your 27 gigs of data is over 4 years old, and deleting this data will significantly reduce eDiscovery cost and management risks. Of course, you don't have to take these recommendations, but they are there. And you can set those filters on how much or how little data you want to import. So you have a drop down here, saying 1, 2, 4, 7 years. And it also gives you a quick snapshot of the types of data that you have that you're trying to import. So I don't know if you can read that very well, but the first and largest pillar is email. That's most of the data that you're trying to import. The next, I don't know what that says. The third being documents, and then the fourth pillar being LinkedIn. And then the gray and the blue is indicating total data. So the top of the gray bar is indicating all the total data. And then if you were to cull it down, the blue bar indicates what would be imported if you were to set these policies. So we're going to go ahead and import that, which was successful. We've decided to only import 35 gigabytes out of 62 of annual review and report documents to be imported. And we're going to let you know when that import is complete. We also have in this right-hand pane in the recommended for you column this mention to retain your tax records. You can see here it says we've detected that content in your organization contains W-2, forms, 1040s, 1054s, or other tax-related info. This is going to allow you to, just in a couple of clicks, create a retention policy to help make this content important and kept around for how long it needs to be kept for. So simply within one click, you're going to go ahead and create and apply those retained tax records policy, which we know, because we know who you are, needs to do. So we're going to go ahead and set up this policy. And in the meantime, I'm going to click over into my tags library to see what tags I have set up here. And I also can see at the top of the page a reference of some of the top classifications that are used in my industry, for example, to give me a couple of recommendations on maybe what I should do or shouldn't do. So if I click into competitive research, for example, things that are tagged with competitive research, I want to treat and retain them and classify them in a certain way. If I go back into retention, I can also see what's going on by data type and also by data age, and what retention policies I have set around those based on tags or based on other classifications. And I can, of course, go in and create a new retention policy, which you can see how simple and intuitive that wizard is. Set your location. Again, this can be across all Office 365 locations, or it allows you to choose specific locations if you don't want to. And we can see when we parse that out, we have Exchange listed, SharePoint sites, OneDrive, Office 365 groups, Skype for Business, and Exchange public folders. We're, of course, going to be able to go in and set those retention settings. So say I want to save these for however many years. Do I want to delete it after this time, or do I just want the option to go back in and reevaluate, for example? And then what type of advanced retention do I want to set up? Do I want to publish these tags to end users? Do I want to apply retention on content that matches specific data types or specific sensitive types that we identify for you? And then we can also go in and add exactly those data types. So for example, things like these known data types that we have, it's very, very small, but these are things like different country bank number, Australian driver's license number, a Chile identification card, an EU debit card number. We recognize and have matched all of these patterns so that you don't have to go in and create retention policies or create the algorithms for recognizing this type of information. We know that people all around the world are going to need to recognize this and probably take a certain action based on something. And then I can go ahead and review my settings and create a policy, and that's created a global retention policy for me that I've decided that I want to keep forever. So we've talked now a lot about data governance. Another thing that we mentioned a lot at the beginning of this session had to do with eDiscovery. So eDiscovery generally occurs when a government agency wants to see if you've been following the right regulations and are doing business properly. Sometimes this occurs when a competitor feels like you violated a patent or copied their work for whatever reason or did something else that was not great. You might get an audit or a request for information. For example, someone who left your organization sues you and requests electronic information to prove what happened and to demonstrate in court what occurred. So you could actually be called upon to grab that information for them, and you're legally required to do so. All of these cases, you're legally required to provide this information to the court. And a lot of times this is adding up to a lot of money being spent on eDiscovery related activities within organizations. And as you can see here, the cost of noncompliance, which is just one of the many staggering stats around this type of activity. A financial institution was fined $9 million for failing to produce customer emails in an arbitration proceeding. So this really can be a huge detriment to many organizations. So a key part about information governance is all about finding that needle in the haystack, and this is a little bit of what we talked through before. Office 365 Advanced eDiscovery helps you find that content within your organization because you own your own data and you should be able to dig through that as effectively as possible. And then once you've identified that data set, that second step there, it gives you the ability to mark that content under hold or render it immutable if you would like to. And then you can preview search results or export that content to any existing review tool that you might already use. So this is talking a bit about going even beyond litigation into a wide range of scenarios. So things that have to do with regulatory compliance, employment law, internal business requirements, for example, making sure that you're providing secure access, that you're identifying relevant data. This is coming up not just in a couple of scenarios, but it really is coming up all the time. We also want to supply you with those rich search capabilities. So real-time in-place searching, so you're not waiting around. Indexing and things are always live and up to date across Office 365. We want to give you the ability to quickly find relevant data. So proximity search and rich query syntax, and then also the ability to quickly make decisions off of that, so it's very easily consumable no matter who you are in the organization, and this is all done in real time. Now there's a couple of export options also that are available to you, which are really great and pretty incomparable in this space. There's of course native export, which makes a lot of sense. Export with analysis into a tool that we all know and love, Excel. And based on the people who this is probably going to for review, being able to export with analysis to Excel is really very important. You're also able to export into several different review tools. So things like Kura or iConnect or Z Approved or many, many others that you might be using. The eDiscovery process often involves sorting through thousands and thousands of email messages and other data types to find a very, very small number that might be relevant. So Office 365 Advanced eDiscovery integrates a company called Quivio, which we acquired a few years ago now. And that is very, very deep machine learning, predictive coding, and text analytics to reduce the costs and challenges of sorting through large quantities of data. And that really is a representative in that screenshot that you see over here on the left or the right-hand side. So Office 365 Advanced eDiscovery reduces the volume of data by finding near duplicate files, reconstructing email threads, and then also doing things like identifying key themes, and data relationships. You can also train the system to intelligently explore and analyze large, very unstructured data sets and quickly zero in on what is relevant. And you can also, again, then export this to third-party tools for review. A really great example of this themes sort of discovery feature is a company that was launching an internal investigation that had to do with insider trading. They were looking for all of those keywords that they knew to be related to insider trading, and they really weren't finding what they wanted or predicted that they would find. What Advanced eDiscovery, however, came back with was these separate clusters of themes that had nothing to do with insider trading, but were rather interesting. So it came back to them with some clustered themes around Star Wars and around grocery shopping. So in and of themselves, Star Wars and grocery shopping are not bad things. You can go ahead and talk about those as much as you want, and that should be fine. But it was very unusual for their end users to be talking about those themes repetitively over long periods of time throughout all of Office 365. And what they discovered upon digging a little bit deeper into that data that was being pulled back to them was they were using code words that had to do with Star Wars and stormtroopers, and were referring to different amounts of money as different vegetables or different fruits or vegetables. I forget what it was. So when they're talking about, X amount of carrots and certain stormtroopers in a paragraph or an email message, they could actually correlate that they were referring to insider trading in certain different amounts of money. And that's something that would have been extremely hard, if not impossible, to discover were it not for those themes being brought back to the reviewer's attention. A little bit more about where we're going with eDiscovery, and again, you'll see a lot of these things show up within the upcoming quarter, within this year. Unified case management, so maintaining that consistency across eDiscovery and Advanced eDiscovery with one user experience. Advanced analytics, so getting a little even further into that. Data completeness, making sure that we're also considering additional file types, defensibility, and as well as expansion of markets, which is always on the top of our minds. Office 365 eDiscovery partners. When it comes to eDiscovery, we lean very heavily on our 365 eDiscovery partners, and many of our top partners are listed here. And there's a lot more information on our partners.office.com page, where these partners are working very closely both with Microsoft, with our product, with our engineering, and with our marketing teams, and then working very closely with you and with our customers to be getting all of these practices up and running. These tools are new and exciting, and they're not things that people are used to using, so our partners are extremely beneficial in this frame. The last thing we want to talk about is auditing. So to reiterate, data is moving to the cloud at an increased pace, and employees are bringing their own devices to work and accessing corporate information using those devices, and that's not a bad thing. That is a great thing. We just need to very much understand how to monitor and to regulate that. There's also multiple ways of sharing data with both internal and external individuals. So we really need to be in touch with our tenant. What's going on at any given time? What does the usage look like of Office 365 and then also other related cloud applications? Who is logging in and where they're logging in from? So we receive over 1 billion events collected daily from things happening in Office 365. And these are all tracked and maintained within our audit reporting. This is on by default for our customers. And we also allow you to opt in or opt out. And this is across, again, all of our workloads and shows up for you in the Security and Compliance Center. Now, why is auditing important? For many of those reasons that I just talked about, but making sure that we're not increasing our risk any further than it needs to be. We're losing intellectual property and customer data all the time, and we need to always make sure that we're not putting ourselves at risk and that we're doing the right things with all of the data that's in our hands. And then with all of these multiple sharing options, with the fact that we're really serving our end users the world on a silver platter, it's really important for us to understand what's going on, how people are using it, and how we can keep evolving and working on the service to make sure that we're servicing people with the productivity and the compliance needs that they need. So this is just a little bit about the architecture that's going on here within data auditing. This really is just meant to illustrate increased transparency. It's really meant to illustrate that continuous activity logging and reporting that are logged across SharePoint, across OneDrive, across Exchange, and across Azure Active Directory. And then the Office 365, where is it? I don't know where that went. Oh, the Management Activity API, which is on, I guess, the bottom half of the screen, is a RESTful API that provides really an unprecedented level of visibility into all of the user and admin transactions within Office 365. And it allows organizations or other software providers you might be working with to integrate Office 365 activity data into their own security and compliance monitoring and reporting solutions. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today is transparency. And the big question, which is, are there times when Microsoft would have access to my data? If so, who and when? And the answer is yes and no. For the large majority of the time, no, Microsoft would never have access to your data. But we do have a product called Customer Lockbox in that case where we might need access to your data. So Customer Lockbox is for Office 365 and can help your customers also meet compliance obligations for data access authentication with logging and auditing controls. So this helps you meet compliance needs that often show up in a lot of regulations, things like HIPAA or FedRAMP. It offers extended access control. So customers who initiate a request for example, a break-fix service will go ahead and be granting final approval access to the Microsoft engineer who needs to access their data. And then customers have visibility into the purpose and the length of the access. And I believe that's illustrated down here in a second. There we go. So this is building out the request might start directly from the customer saying, hey, we're experiencing this issue. The Microsoft engineer might identify that we would need to access your data in order to remediate that problem if that were to happen. They would submit a request to the lockbox system. That request would go through a variety of different levels and end up with a Microsoft manager who would have to go in and approve that request, and then that would be handed off to the Microsoft engineer. With Customer Lockbox, you're very much not kept out of that latter part of the process. So once it's approved by a Microsoft manager, those details and exactly what's going on would go back to you as the customer, and then you as the customer would go in for that final approval for the Microsoft engineer to go in and make whatever changes he or she needs to make, and also understand how long they have access to it, exactly what data it is, et cetera. And then the last question that we often get, and I referenced this before, is where is my data? On the Office 365 Trust Center Online, we provide interactive data maps to provide specific geographical details as to where your Office 365 and Dynamics CRM and a lot of our other workloads are located. And you can check into that online, and it gives a lot of details about those data centers, how data is processed there, and anything else that relates to these. So that is it for me. I've mentioned the Office 365 Trust Center multiple times, and those resources are linked in this deck, which will be available to you as well. But the Office 365 Trust Center and the Microsoft Trust Center really is the best place to go to not only learn about our Office 365 compliant solutions and how we enable you with customer controls to make those decisions and turn things on or off, but also to stay up to date on Microsoft itself's compliance commitments and how we meet and prove to you that we meet these regulations as well. So thank you very much for attending today on a Friday almost evening. I appreciate it, and I hope this was useful for you. Thank you.